Hello, folks. Um, some of you may or may not, well, most of you have heard the show, Mr. District Attorney by name. I don't know how many of you have listened to it. There haven't been that many around for, gosh, how old is our hobby? Almost 60 years. Um, there's 35 that we now have, and you'll get instructions on how to access them. Um, I I started to get more interested in the show recently as I did some research on Jay Jostyn, who was the star, and realized how he rarely comes up as great as in the names of great actors, even though he had quite the career. And Mr. District Attorney rarely comes up in the list of favorite programs, and part of that has been that there's been so few of them. And as I dug into it, like so many programs I've gotten involved in, the more you learn the backstory, the more interesting everything else
Seldom
becomes.
is.
Who, somebody have a question?
Mike, please mute.
Sorry, I wasn't aware
Okay.
it had gone off.
No,
Okay.
you're live.
Yes. Was he talking about me going off, or
No, we're
there's
asking
Joe
Mike.
going off again? All right. So as I dug into the backstory, it was really, really interesting how this came about. We know the story of how Gunsmoke had a very short turnaround before it became a series of just a matter of weeks. It turns out Mr. District Attorney was a similar situation. And then it just ballooned into this massive franchise that's basically forgotten now. So this became one of my missions, the same kind of mission I had for Theater 5, to get more and more people interested in this particular show. So um, the three people on the first slide were the main three actors for the bulk of the series. Jay Jostyn played Mr. District Attorney, who never had a name and never had a city, and that was on purpose. Vicky Vola, who had a very, very long and very, very prosperous career in radio and did some television, and was one of the leaders of AFTRA in New York and also on a national basis. So she was very, very well known. And Len Doyle, who did not do much radio except for MrDA, he was a Broadway actor, and he needed work one time. He auditioned for the show, did terrible, and they selected him anyway. And then he had a wonderful career with it. So these three were not at the beginning of the series. That series started as a serial. We'll learn little bit more about that, and then turned into a half-hour long program as a replacement for Bob Hope in the summer of 1939. Dwight Weiss, who some of you may have met at the radio convention years and years and years ago, was Mr. DA in the serial, which lasted 11 weeks. And then Raymond Edward Johnson played Mr. District Attorney for that season. And then they hired Jay Jostyn, and he had the role until 1953. So it was a very, very long time. For Bristol Myers, Jostyn did 589 episodes. He did a total of 665 episodes, and only 35 are around, and that's absolutely incredible. But it's not uncommon for a lot of New York shows where there was less archiving than there was for the Hollywood programs, and we could get into that. That's a bar stool discussion, as they say. I don't drink, but I'll gladly join you. Um, the there was a fire in a warehouse supposedly in the 1960s, and a lot of transcription discs were destroyed in that were at ABC and other places. That's what I was told by some of the actors I met in the 1970s. But anyways, Jay Jostyn has this part, and he becomes so well associated with the part that people used to just think he was an attorney. And in fact, he would go study for his parts by sitting in courtrooms, especially night court, trying to learn as much as he could about the behavior of attorneys and the like. So this is where it is from 1939 to 1953, and it's an extremely long run. It was sponsored for most all of that time, which is rare for a lot of shows. The only time it wasn't sponsored was when it was on Mutual for a final 11 shows in 1953. So it always had a budget. It had a big budget, and you could tell from some of the productions that they were really putting a lot of funds into the production qualities, especially the music. If 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 there's a show that's similar in production and the way it uses music, um, when Casey Crime Photographer was sponsored by Anchor Hocking, that had a lot of big orchestral music. But it got that 5 years after MrDA started. So this was quite a show in its time, and head and shoulders above a lot of the other productions of 1941 and 1942. Over the years, its ratings were exceptional. Um, these On this chart, red is Lux Radio Theater, the biggest show of the Golden Age, with a massive budget. The yellow line is Suspense, and the blue line is MrDA. And you can see that during the mid 1940s, MrDA's ratings were almost as big as Lux, which was a massive, massive hit. And most people don't realize that. And MrDA was beating Suspense. And we all love Suspense. And when we think of Suspense with the big Hollywood stars and all that, and still MrDA was beating that for most of the years in the ratings. So it's kind of forgotten, unfortunately, that the show was this big. On the nights that it was on the air, it was usually number one. Um, and that included some really big shows that were on the same network for the prior half hour and the following half hour. So people were tuning in just for MrDA on NBC and then switching somewhere else. But when you look at some of the shows that uh, it was ahead of in the ratings, um, Kay Kaiser, Eddie Cantor was on NBC, Bing Crosby for a year, Duffy's Tavern was on NBC. That finished second behind MrDA. Gildersleeve was number three. MrDA was number two. I forget who was ahead that time for 48 to 49. But it was a big winner, and it was a real moneymaker, especially for Phillips H. Lord, and we'll explain how that happened shortly. But MrDA got its start because Amos and Andy, or Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll, decided to make the jump from NBC to CBS, which was a bigger network and had much better stations. And when they made that decision, the NBC affiliates who depended on the Amos and Andy show, 15-minute show at that time, for some really strong advertising sales, they were shocked. They were just absolutely shocked and worried about how they were going to replace that particular income. Um, you can understand why Gosden and Carell go, because the CBS network had about I think 15 or 20% larger coverage in terms of potential listeners than NBC had, and also Campbell Soup was throwing a lot of money their way. Um, NBC had a sense of what they wanted to do, but they weren't really all that certain. Phillips H. Lord was working on MrDA. At He was extremely well known at that time for some shows that we really have never heard all that much. Shows like Seth Parker and some others, but everybody knows Gangbusters. and that was a big winner in terms of being on the air for so long. But this idea, this concept of Mr. District Attorney wasn't really finished. But they went to Lord. He said, "We have this program," and they put it together in about 3 weeks. And in late March, when they had to uh, get ready to broadcast, um, NBC became extremely active, and they were trying to hold the hands of their stations, and they sent telegram after telegram, and this is some of the text of it. "We've been searching for the most sensational new show, and we found the answer. It's Mr. District Attorney." And they already lay down the groundwork that the attorney is a composite of other attorneys, and they don't really know it until later. He does not have a name because Phillips H. Lord and later Ed Byron wanted people to identify um, uh, whoever was playing Mr. DA as their district attorney, the one in their town or the one in the closest city. And it wouldn't be localized to a city. They'd just be general references to things, but not anything particular that would identify a city. And then this is kind of funny at the end. "Do your utmost to help us prove the Amos and Andy shift was a bad mistake. Hang on to your audience." So we know Amos and Andy only got bigger and bigger, but so did Mr. DA. Now, there was a great amount of distrust from what I've been able to tell from correspondence about the show that NBC was having between themselves and also with Phillips H. Lord, and some of the comments that they were getting from outsiders. Uh, the legal profession, whether they be working in the justice system or independently, a lot of the law enforcement folks did not like gangbusters. And therefore did not like Phillips H. Lord, so they became suspicious of this entire thing. They thought that gangbusters was just there to sensationalize things. It wasn't terribly accurate. It had low production values, and when they did analyses of who was listening, it was not a target audience that the stations felt or the networks felt that they could really sell, because it tended to be lower income and lower middle class workers. Uh, they were not as educated as the audiences that they were hoping for. Their incomes were lower, and sometimes they were in family situations that they didn't necessarily think were going to help them sell products. And so, right from the outset, they were worried about what kind of advertising a sponsor they might be able to get for Mr. DA if it turned out to be just a clone of Gangbusters in some way. And they were also worried about some litigation about some of the stories, because Gangbusters was sued by some people here and there who thought the stories were about them, or they knew they were about them, and then the facts were just terribly mishandled. So uh, Gangbusters had a bit of baggage to it, and the idea that they were going to rely on something like Mr. DA from Phillips H. Lord to replace something that was so successful for NBC, like Amos and Andy, really made a lot of folks worry. Well, the show did go on the air with Dwight Weiss as the DA, and it started to get negative reviews. And among the negative reviews was one from the New York Daily News by Sid Shallot, uh, who made a comparison to the show Big Town, which was then had Edgar G. Robinson as its star, which was, in my mind, a totally different show, but that's the show that they were aiming at. And Shallot said that the shows were shoddy episodes, handicapped by slovenly writing. I guess that means they spilled coffee all over their papers. Handicapped Well, and inept acting. So that doesn't sound like a good combination. So somebody sends this review to David Sarnoff, the head of NBC, and of course, one of the true radio pioneers in terms of the technology and radio as a business. And it just has one word on it: how. So there's a flurry of activity trying to figure out what this is. And I've seen some of the memos back and forth from some of the archives from NBC that are at the University of Wisconsin, and they were worried. But in the end, they kept trying to make excuses like it's going to get better. We know about the problems. We're going to get different writers and all. And strangely, despite all these problems, the ratings keep going up. And this was a time of year, it started in April, a time of year when um, listenership starts to go down just because much of the country starts having better weather and people's patterns of traveling and errands and family life start to change and adapt to the new outdoors. But uh, Mr. DA's ratings keep going up. And people are starting to notice. One of the businesses that NBC did a lot of work with was Pepsodent, and they were looking for a summer replacement for Bob Hope. And they decided that they liked Mr. District Attorney, but they wanted to change it to a half-hour series. And they accepted all that. NBC uh, agreed, although there are some uh, comments in notes that say, "Gee, we sold to Pepsi too soon. We could have gotten a bigger sponsor." But for Hope's final show that season in at near the end of June, they were so um, interested in promoting the show that they had a 10-minute sketch or tease part of the program in his final show. Now, if any of you have collected Mr. District Attorney for a while, you know that there is a half-hour introduction program prior to the serial beginning, and that was part of the way of allaying fears of the stations and also build an audience where they had people talking about the show and how important it was going to be, and that aired the day before the serial started. And this is a similar kind of thing here. They're putting the teaser for the new half-hour Mr. District Attorney on Bob Hope's show, and then it will start the next week. Dwight Weiss does one show for Pepsi, and he's replaced by Raymond Edward Johnson. Um, Ray Johnson lasts for the rest of the summer season. He's replaced by Jay Jostyn later, but this is almost a year and a half before Raymond gets the gig that everybody knows him for at Inner Sanctum. So this is very early for a program uh, to be to be getting this amount of attention. So Pepsi is very happy. They signed for another 26 weeks on NBC Blue starting um, in October, and they hired Jay Jostyn. They the show was also turned over to Ed Byron. Now, some of you may remember me mentioning Ed Byron when I was talking about Theater 5. I think we did that presentation 3 years ago. And Byron was a very accomplished radio production uh, uh, manager. He was also a writer. He had come from WLW in Cincinnati, where a lot of radio talent had been developed over the years. And that's likely one of the reasons why he hired Jay Jostyn to be the lead, because he had worked with Jay Jostyn at the WLW before he came to New York. Um, Phillips H. Lord basically gave the show to Ed Byron, but Phillips Lord kept all of the rights for the characters, the title, any other kind of media, and all that. So all the time that Ed Byron was turning the show around and making it a success, Lord was getting residual payments of some type to him. And also Lord was making deals with comic books and also movie studios for the character. But Byron had full control over the radio program. He hires Jostyn, Vola, and Doyle to be a permanent cast. He builds up the production values with music, eventually having Peter Van Steeden lead the orchestra, but it was always a good orchestra right from the beginning. And he changes the program to have a much better demographic base, better for advertisers. So if if Gangbusters turned people off because of its violence and and characterizations of criminals and violence and the like, MrDA was not like that. It changed rather significantly. When MrDA went on the air as a serial, it was emphasizing the um, investigation of various rackets that were active in big cities, and it led to a formulaic uh, process of writing for the show. If you've listened to the enough of the Green Hornets, you know every week is a racket of some kind, and MrDA was starting to turn into that, or they didn't want it to turn into that. So they made it more of a crime and mystery show, and they could have all kinds of different crimes, not just rackets. Byron also hired some very good writers. One person he hired was a Jerry Devine, who became a major producer, and a few years later would start This Is Your FBI in Hollywood. So he had good people around him all the time. The opening of the show was designed by Byron. In fact, he had to remind Phillips H. Lord of that. He had the rights to the opening, and most of us have heard the opening, Mr. District Attorney, Champion of the People, Defender of Truth, and the like. And that is people used to be able to recite that after not even after not having heard the show for decades later. It was so memorable for the listeners. I always get a kick out of the Vitalis ads because, well, first of all, Vitalis had alcohol, and that was a problem during a prohibition. People doing anything they could for alcohol, and if you wondered why Wild Root Cream Oil advertised itself as a non-alcoholic hair tonic, that's one of the reasons, because Vitalis did have alcohol, which was a drying agent. But the funniest thing about Vitalis is they say that you should give your head a 60-second workout, implying that it will prevent baldness. Well, I never tried it, but it's you ev- people finally realized it didn't work. But the idea that you would be rubbing your head for a whole minute with some greasy kid stuff is just kind of funny to me. And then it got matched up with other Bristol Myers products, Ipana toothpaste. This is after uh, Pepson's contract ended, and that has a pretty interesting history to itself of some of its ingredients. But at the end, they put Jay Jostyn in the echo chamber and said, "And it shall be my duty as district attorney." And then you would get the full music from the orchestra. It was quite a well-known opening. So Pepsin leaves after the 26 weeks. They were still sponsoring Bob Hope. They stopped sponsoring MrDA because I think it was more of a budgetary thing, not because they were unhappy with it, but paying Hope for the Hope Show at that time was quite expensive and had better ratings than MrDA at that time too. The big comedians had massive ratings. The picture on the screen is actually from the 1951 TV show that the same cast did 20 episodes for, starting in 1951. But it's a good picture of the three of them. Len Doyle on the left, Jay Jostyn at the desk, looking like an attorney, and Vicky Vola looking like Miss Miller. Um, Bristol Myers was a longtime advertiser on radio, and they had a very, very big budget. Their products had very great and great profit margins. So they could do these kinds of things. And for a period of time, Mr. DA had a budget that was almost 25% more than Suspense had. And you would think that Suspense would have a really big budget. But Mr. DA, they didn't hold back on any of the funding for the program. They loved the cast. In 1944, they did an odd thing. They gave the cast 3-year contracts. And Jostyn got a 5-year contract in 47, which said you won't act on any other program. And that may be paradoxically one of the reasons why not that many people know Jay Jostyn, because he was only doing Mr. District Attorney. Um, Whereas everybody knows William Conrad, even though he had the role of Matt Dillon for such a long time, but people knew him before when he was doing other shows. We'd hear him on The Whistler, we'd hear him in other times. But a lot of Jay Jostyn's big career was in the 1930s, and there weren't that many shows preserved for us fans to listen to. So a lot of Jostyn's career, where he was incredibly busy, while doing a lot of uncredited stuff on the soap operas and other programs every single day, and he gets the gig for Mr. DA, and it's still at a time where not that many programs are being preserved. So um, his career from a historical perspective is at a disadvantage in that regard. So what did Ed Byron do? He changed the worries that the Mr. DA would become gangbusters in suits. Um, they were always comparing the program to Big Town. I don't think that's particularly fair, but he really made good investments in the writing. He did a lot of the writing himself until he hired some other folks. Uh, there was no big star attraction to it, yet he built this program that was finishing #1 on the nights of its broadcast. Um, there is a problem with it that Mr. DA in the radio series is more of a detective and a very authoritarian detective than a district attorney. So that's the way the stories go. But some DAs were um, not upset. They didn't give the show a lot of credence in that regard, that it didn't actually portray what a district attorney does in great detail. And you have to think that what what DAs do most of the day is kind of boring. They're preparing cases all the time. They're not going out doing investigations. What saved them the program from DAs being against it was the fact that it had very strong stories proving that the crime really isn't worth it, that there are victims of crime, and you have to be concerned about the victims and preventing more crimes. And that's a lot of the focus that Mr. DA had. Um, he, while Mr. DA has a formula to it, um, where there's a crime, Harrington, played by Len Doyle, goes out to investigate. Everything he comes back is the facts are right, but his interpretation is always wrong. Miss Miller has some insights to add to the process, and then Mr. DA gets involved, and they go out into the field, and they find out exactly what's going on. So it's not like Big Town. It's not like the Green Hornet. It was different, and the excitement comes from more preventing crime and and working against it than the actual crime or violence itself. The uh, Byron's other uh, efforts in the show was that the there's an urgency to act. In real life, so many of the things that district attorneys do and the legal system does takes years before things uh, are detected and then end up in criminal proceedings and then finally in court. And sometimes it could take 18 months, it could take 2 years, it could take 3 years. Everything has to end here in 30 minutes, and that's just the nature of the story. The same thing is true for today's series Law and Order, where the police should make the arrest. They talk to the lawyers, and then the lawyers should have lots more gray hair and just seem a lot older by the time they go to court, as opposed to looking like it's 20 minutes later. But that's just the nature of the story. World War II changed the series and the perception of it. They did a lot more against schemes that were occurring because of wartime and some unscrupulous individuals. There's a program that was just recently found, The Traveling Rat, which has Mendel Kramer in it, about the stealing of ration coupons. So if somebody listens to that, you have to explain what ration coupons are. So they would do a lot more stories like that. It also, with so many family members away at the war, Mr. District Attorney was kind of a reassurance that there's a lot of good out there, and that people are working to protect others, and that the law is there for a reason, and that despite how uncertain the war news might be, there were things that they could rely on a bit here back at home. A lot of critics changed their minds about Mr. DA over the years. And originally they were very skeptical, complained about the acting and the writing and all that. But when they started to get a little bit more topical in terms of things that were happening in the news and related to crime or various schemes, it was where they really shined. And McGee Adams, who was a very, very good critic, probably my favorite critic of the radio era, um, he wrote a small piece. It says that the producers of MrDA recognize that a crime show has a public responsibility bigger than entertainment. And that was part of Byron's style years before. I mean, McGee Adams was writing this in 1949, but this is the theme of the show. Adams continues, too many crime shows look upon such a responsibility only as a thing that cramps their style. And that's one reason why Mr. DA is so different. Mr. DA puts it to work positively and constructively as a weapon of decency. And that's generally the feelings that you get over the years as Mr. DA was on the air more and more, that's the way that people felt about it. So um, one of the purposes of the presentation and the work on Mr. DA is to bring the program to the attention of a lot more people. And you have to wonder why was it so unknown for so long, or so poorly respected for so long? Well, back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, we really only had two shows in common circulation that everybody had. One was a radiola release, The Case of the Money Machine, which was from later in the series, 1951. The program was still on NBC at that time, but it's not from the golden age of the program. And then the other uh, record by Memorabilia Records was set up for a re-entry, which was done on Mutual in 1953, when all the production values of the series were stripped away and Ed Byron was no longer involved. And it's just doesn't have the life that Mr. DA had in the 1940s. So on one hand, we have two programs. One of them is pretty good. The other one doesn't reflect why Mr. District Attorney was such a popular and such a strong program. And that's all we had. But now things are different. Um, so if you uh, look here, you've got at the top of the slide, you've got a link to the resource page for Mr. District Attorney. I've been building this up for over the past 6 or 8 weeks. some of which has had Carl's assistance in locating stuff. So if you go to bit.ly, bit.ly, I made it, got a short URL for you, MWOTRC. Everybody knows how to spell that in this group, right? And then MrDA, you will get to a web page that has lots and lots of stuff for you. So we're going to go through that now, and I'll explain some of the things that you'll be looking at. First thing is the series has never had a good log. It's always been piecemeal here and there, or from dates assigned to programs that were found, but no one's ever put together a complete log. And that really hampered things because how nobody really had documented how long the serial had lasted. People barely even knew that there was a Pepsodent summer series because there were no programs from that era. Didn't know that there was a Jay Jostyn Pepsodent series because there were no programs from that. And then we just have a smattering of programs from the 1940s sponsored by Bristol Myers. But this information wasn't really available. And then as we gotten more involved with newspaper research like newspapers.com, which um, is just I must be on there at least an hour a day looking for things. And then Carl had access to NBC records for Mr. District Attorney, not the entire series, but for a lot of the series. And we were finally able to between those cards and the newspapers come up with it's got to be over 95% of the show titles are now known for the bulk of the series. We know very little about anything with Pepsodent or prior to that, but all of Bristol Myers is covered, including the 20 episode TV series from 1951 to 1952 with the radio cast. And we've got decent information on the 11-week Mutual series, but it all came together and it was a group effort. Some of the people on the cover you may know, you may not be able to see them right now on your screen, but Don Carr, who's a collector in Florida, who turned himself into an expert on the syndicated series with David Bryan, and he's helped with lots of other stuff. James Decker, collector at Cobalt Club, who's been very helpful. Matthew Nunes, who's a professor in Ohio, is active on Cobalt Club and is an excellent researcher. Barb Watkins from SPURDVAC, Corey Harker, who's now the president of SPURDVAC, disc expert Doug Hopkinson, Anthony Pemberton, who's one of our most active reel transfer uh, volunteers for all these reels that we've gotten from California and the like. He's been following along on the Cobalt Club, MrDA. Travis Connor donated some discs as James Blackson transferred some AFRS discs. And we've got some other Cobalt Club members involved. Um, the NBC archives at the Library of Congress, of course, with Carl's help. If any of you have never gone to worldradiohistory.com and you have a favorite show, just go there and start looking into Billboard magazine, Radio Life, and like. They have thousands of these magazines scanned. They've all been OCR'd. So if you've got a favorite series, you just search for it and you start finding stuff that's absolutely incredible. And then there's an archives of NBC documents at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Uh, that's where the William Spear, June Havoc papers are, which are got a lot of information for suspense. Those people are just absolutely wonderful in terms of helping you find things with the rapid turnaround, and they're just extraordinarily helpful. So if any of you um, are doing research for radio and need some context there, just let me know. But this log, which is I think it's 57 pages, goes through week by week of the series. It's got titles, it's got information about individual episodes, and it's got the information from the NBC archives about plot lines, casting, and the other things. Download this. It's a PDF. It's 2 MB. 57 pages isn't too much to print. Um, and it's just such a leap ahead to what we had before for this series. Also on the resource page, we've got 35 Jay Jostyn MrDAs. All of them are in FLAC, lossless sound. There's also the MP3s there that uh, um, Internet Archive has. And to show you the part of the problem, Jostyn did 665 episodes. We've only got 22 network copies and 13 AFRS. Thank goodness for AFRS. Years and years ago, collectors did not care about AFRS recordings. They hated them. They didn't think that they were real. They were so cut up. They were, and a lot of it had to do with the collectors who preceded us, who remembered radio for the network of the golden age with the commercials and the announcers, and AFRS just seemed like cut up pieces that had nothing of the glory. But this is now the only way that we're finding programs is AFRS discs that were never destroyed and are still floating around. And it really makes quite a difference in what we have. Otherwise, we just have 22 instead of 35. And 35 is still too many. We also have some air checks. Some home people were recording MrDA at home. 5 episodes have survived, and they're not complete. But we have them. They're up there at the Internet Archive, and you can see the links for them on the resource page. And we have, of the 55 serial installments, we have 6. So it's scarcity all over. There's nothing of the Pepsodent series with Raymond Edward Johnson. There's nothing of the Pepsodent series with Jay Jostyn, and you don't get anything until you into the Bristol Myers series. So the scarcity of programs, the stupidity of Jay Jostyn for signing an exclusive contract that may have had 2 commas in it if it was signed today. Imagine that. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't look for the series, and they should. They should. It's not a top series in terms of drama. I mean, it's definitely not Shakespeare, but it is fun, and you do enjoy it. Now, finding more out about the series on all these links are on the resource page. Chris Lambesis was basically a kid in 1968. Jay Jostyn was on a call-in show in Los Angeles, and Chris calls him up talking about MrDA. So that's recorded. I think that's just a 4-minute chat, but it's really quite good. And then Chuck Shaden, who was a nostalgia broadcaster in Chicago for decades, did an 18-minute interview in 1975 with Jay Jostyn. And that's available too. I find it confusing when I'm thinking, oh, 1975, that's pretty good. And then I realize that's 50 years ago. So even the things that we may have been around to hear is really old now. Same Time, Same Station was a program in California in the 1970s. They did a really nice 2-hour coverage of Jay Jostyn's career with lots of excerpts, and these are all up on there as well. And then there's another way that we can find out what happened to certain episodes. Some magazines did photo stories where they staged scenes of radio scripts and had everybody dress up as their characters and create a sequence of pictures that would follow the plot line, and then the editors would write in what was happening at each stage of the story. Sometimes these were 2-page spreads, sometimes they were 3-page spreads, but in all cases of the ones that we have, right now we have four. We don't really know how many of them were done. All of the programs that we have that way where we have no recordings of. So this gives us an insight into what those programs were. And then two things I want to bring to your attention are uh, appearances of MrDA brand new shows on the Good Old Days of Radio podcast with John Tefteller. And he got these programs from a collector who passed away. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Barry Brooks. Barry was a pioneer collector in the 1960s. He was a dentist, and he was there collecting. And in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, if you were a patient of Dr. Brooks, you heard old time radio every time you went in for a cleaning or a filling or a root canal. There was something of classic radio playing in the background. Well, Barry Brooks reels came up for purchase, and they floated around a little bit. Nobody bought them for a while, but John had a chance to go look through them when the reels came around to a place where John was actually traveling in New York. And he asked me, what should I be looking for? And I said, see if you can find Mr. District Attorney. And he found two shows, and they're brand new. They're an absolutely gorgeous sound, and you can listen to them on YouTube. You could also download them from the links that I have on the resource page. But if you listen to them here on YouTube, you'll get John's interview of me and our discussion about the series and some of the quirky nature of things of these particular episodes before you listen to them. So these are strongly recommended, and it's another way of enjoying the program. Jay Jostyn made some other appearances, and he was getting these appearances on radio just because he was Mr. District Attorney. Um, and one of them is Radio Hall of Fame, which was a Philco show, and they got an award from the Hall of Fame, and they performed what turns out to be a missing program to this day. And the bulk of the drama is there. It obviously doesn't have the commercials or anything, but that's one way of finding out what a show was. That show was the perfect frame up. Jostyn is on Raleigh Room with Buddy Clark was subbing for Hildegard that particular night, and there's some comedic stuff. Jostyn could do that kind of thing. Uh, Part of it was still playing MrDA and pretending to be above it all was kind of the way they wanted him to play the role. And then we recently found a script for Jostyn's appearance on Supper Club, the musical program, but we have no recording of that. I added it here in case somebody can find that. But Jostyn and others did make appearances on other programs. Jostyn appeared on Fred Allen. There's no recording of that. There's just a negative review of the show. That's all we've been able to find. Some of the scripts, like they were done for photo stories, were also done as short stories by Movie Radio Guide magazine. And we just recently found these at World Radio History, and you can see those. These are, again, two missing episodes. When Jostyn does 665 episodes, and you're only going to get 35, your chances of finding a missing episode are really quite good. And we're finding them in print, just not in audio. There were Mr. District Attorney movies. These were all arranged by Phillips H. Lord, and they're also kind of comedic. They wanted to turn it into kind of a screwball comedy. They have very little to do with the radio program, where in the radio series, uh, MrDA did not have a name, did not have a city. When you put that character in a movie and people are seeing them on screen, it seems kind of awkward not to give them a name. But why they gave them the name as P. Cadwallader Jones, other than making it seem like a joke, or of some sort. I don't know, but it's hard to do what they did on radio of not giving him a name and not giving him a city, where you kind of have to do that in a visual medium. And they did the same thing on television when Frederick Ziv did the David Bryan TV series. We don't know what they did for the Jay Jostyn TV series on ABC in 1951 and 1952. I assume that they carried through that the DA doesn't have a name and is for some nameless city there. But they did not do that for the movies. But they did that for the comic books. This was a very big comic book series. Um, and these follow the radio series. The comic book on the left is from 1941, published by Dell. Dell had a series of books called The Funnies, and Mr. DA was in 29 of those issues. They were about 4 pages long in term for the stories. This might be a collection of some of those stories. It might be reprints of that. Uh, but the one on the right is from DC Comics. That ran for 11 years. It was a bi-monthly. They did 67 issues, and they did carry through on the same concept as the radio series. Um, I don't know how many of the comic book stories were adapted from radio scripts. Um, we don't have enough scripts in order to compare them. We don't have enough programs in order to do that. But I think we have to imagine that many of them were. I mean, the show was kind of formulaic, so they could kind of be reusing the same plot with some minor tweaks here and there. But again, Phillips H. Lord in 1940 and 1941 licensed Dell to do comics, and he still got licensing fees from DC Comics, even though he was no longer involved in the show. So he gave the program to Byron, but he kept everything else. And that's that was pretty smart. I think he may have ruined the show had he been actually running it. May not have lasted as long, may not have had achieved the kind of stature that it did. But remember, Phillips H. Lord, after Gangbusters, and during Gangbusters, he was doing shows like Counter Spy and others. So he wasn't hurting, but he was still making some good money off Mr. DA, even though he wasn't involved in the day-to-day stuff. There was also a Big Little book. These were kind of popular. They were about 3.5 inches by 4.5 inches, and about an inch and a half thick. And the left-hand side would have some line art in it, black and white, and the right-hand side would have text in a prose format. So it was designed for younger readers. In the corner, you see the See 'em Move, just flip. They would have like almost like a cartoon that you would grab the pages and you could flip them, and there would be a small image in the corner, and those images would move like you were watching a movie. But again, 2 scripts were used for the stories in here, and neither of them are available as audio. So uh, we have a few of them. Those are all marked in the log when these kinds of things occurred. And then I just want to make a point. This is basically the last slide um, about the David Bryan Ziv series. Um, I've never really been a fan of this series. I know some people are. It's a grittier version of Mr. DA. It's definitely not Ed Byron's Mr. DA. It is more of a gangbusters um, a kind of approach to things. Um, it's grittier. It's a little more risque. It's more violent, and it's been around. Most of the episodes, there are 52, exist. There's a few where you have some half shows, but they've all had incorrect dates. So in the log, we fixed that. And Collector Don Carr was the one who really worked hard on that a couple of years ago. So that log is in there. Brian did the TV show. So Fred Ziv bought the rights from Phillips H. Lord. He had purchased some rights to do a movie and a TV show, but he finalized all the rights, and the TV show ran for 2 years. It started in April 1954, and the radio show started in September 1954. Yet there are lots of David Bryan shows that are in circulation um, with dates of 1952 and 1953, and those are just impossible because uh, they're wrong. So we fixed that in the log. That's one of the big contributions of that. Even though we wanted to make sure that everybody learned about Jay Jostyn and his many years of MrDA, we felt that the getting the Brian thing right was very important. And so that is it. I'm will take your questions. I'll even take your answers. So I appreciate your attention for that. And hopefully you'll get onto that resource page and start listening to MrDA. If you've got a half an hour commute, great. You've got 17 days of MrDA ahead of you. Everybody's muted. Feels like I did something wrong.
Oh, we're still awake, Joe. You did a fine job.
Excellent. Joe, I have a question.